Welcome, everyone, to our 21st episode of Youth Got Next. I'm YPT here with Miles, and we're going to talk a little bit about the kingdoms of both Judah and Israel. And we talked a little about how that kind of came to be last time as an overview, but today we get into the weeds of what actually happened. Why did they divide?
Yeah. And so what you see is basically, we talked about it last week, but I'll say their names again. The two people we're really looking at is Jeroboam and Rehoboam,
The Boam boys.
They're the Boam boys. And what we're going to see is they fight in a big way. And it's ultimately going to lead to the division of the nation. So we talked about last week. But we get a little bit more into the story of kind of what causes the divide here. And what we see is really, it comes down to some selfishness.
Oh, definitely.
Because what we have is Rehoboam is currently the king in charge, and Jeroboam comes in and says, hey, you guys are being too harsh on my people. You are taxing us too hard. You're working us too hard. Would you be willing, king, to lighten up what you're putting on our people? And we see Rehoboam says, hey, give me 3 days to consider this, and I'll come back to you with an answer, which at first glance, that's maybe a good response. I need some time to think about this, but then
really
what does he go do?
Well, so it doesn't end so well. He takes some time, which is good.
Right.
I think that's very wise.
Yeah.
It's a great move. What are you going to do? I don't know. Let me think about it. And so then he goes and finds some wise counsel from some older men, and they say, you know what? Tone it down. Your dad was wealthy and he could get away with this. You're new in this role. Maybe you should be nice, and the people will love you if you give them a tax break.
Right.
And he goes, all right. Thanks for your input. And then he goes off and he finds some guys who really don't have a whole lot of experience in the ruling world. And they're just new at all of this. And they have some amazing ideas in their mind. And they say, you know, I think what you need to do is double down.
Yep.
You need to look at them and say, you think my dad was bad? My little pinky is going to be bigger than his waist.
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly what the text says.
100%. Yeah, it's right in there.
It just blows my mind. So the 3 days go by. He listens to the younger men. He does not take the older men's counsel. And listen to this is exactly what he says to them. He says, yes, my father laid heavy burdens on you, but I'm going to make them even heavier. My father beat you with whips, but I will beat you with scorpions. What a king to follow.
Yeah, like 100% that's going to cause some division in the kingdom.
Yes.
Of course, like I honestly, I don't know what he was thinking in trying to keep and retain a kingdom other than, just being blind with selfishness. But that's what he does. He says, okay, you want to break. Instead, I'm going to make things worse. And so what we see is Jeroboam says, okay, well, I'm not about that. No. And so he grabs his guys, which end up being 10 of the 12 tribes, and ends up saying, all right, we're going to go do our own thing. We're splitting off. And at the end, what we see is a civil war essentially is started because of this one act. And I think that just something small to pull from that is how much effect really comes from one man's selfishness here. Like, I think sometimes when we make a selfish decision, oftentimes we're like, well, this only affects me. Maybe it's going to affect the person that I'm being selfish towards, when in reality, Rehoboam's selfishness causes a huge outbreak of war that leads to the destruction that we were talking about in the last podcast. So just a good reminder for us that like selfishness is never a good play. But on top of that, it's always affecting more than just you, which is a good reminder out of this. But what happens with Jeroboam, right? Because they split ways, and Jeroboam, you would think, okay, he made the right decision for his people to get him out of this hard work. He's going to be a good leader, but maybe he proves that's not the case.
Well, God actually put him in that position. It's very clear when you go through and read the chapter, but he misses the mark, and this is what happens. He takes the people away. They go live in the north, so they're away from Jerusalem, which is where the worship of God was to take place, because Solomon had built a temple there.
Right.
But he's afraid. So his fear causes him to set up a new altar location. And at first it seems like maybe he's just going to have them worship God there. No, he sets up calves, golden calves, like we're talking cows.
Yeah.
And he causes them to worship a god named Baal or Baal, who is in direct opposition to the God who loves and cares for Israel.
Yeah.
And so he leads the people away from God's clear instruction, and he sets up the northern kingdom for a hard fail because every single king will always be bad. None of them ever are obedient to God.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, he sets them off on the wrong foot here.
Yeah.
Like, how could you be successful when you've been set up to worship a God that's not the one true God? But that's how Jeroboam sets up his people is to worship this, and it's out of fear, like you said, and it's out of fear of losing them when they begin to worship the one true God, and so they're worshiping idols, and it leads them down a path of destruction. And again, you and I were talking about this a little bit before, but it's crazy to think about how real this still is in our world.
Oh, definitely.
How maybe it's not necessarily a king over his people, but there are constantly people or things that are fighting for our attention and honestly our worship, right? Because we would define worship as what's taking your time, money, effort, and energy. And so I think constantly in our day and age, things are pulling us towards, hey, give me your time. Hey, give me your energy. Hey, give me your affection, not God. Whether that's a person that we look up to and idolize, maybe it's a thing, an activity, whatever it is. But it's so real how many things are fighting to steal our attention away from God and onto something that is not leading us down a good path.
I've heard it said many times, if you really want to know what somebody loves, look at their bank account or their checking account and look at their calendar. Where do they spend their money and where do they spend their time?
That's good.
And that is the measure. If you spend your money with God's purposes and you spend your time with God's purposes and with the God who made you, you're probably going to be a godly success.
Yeah.
When you refuse, like Jeroboam, and you become afraid, you become selfish, you begin to pursue the things that will pull you away from God.
Yeah. And we see when that persists long term, it leads them to destruction.
Total destruction.
And so I think it's a good reminder for us that, hey, maybe you are looking towards something in place of God. Turn away and come back to God. That's the easy instruction there of destruction is the long-term result, but turn away before you get there and come back. So,
and a reminder, God is gracious. He continues sending prophets to try to call them to respond to truth. And of course, they persist and they're destroyed.
That's right. That's right. Well, guys, hopefully this was an encouragement for you. Thank you guys for tuning in to Stop 21. We're going to keep doing it. I know we say that every time, but that's because that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep going through the Flyover plans. So join us next week as we do Stop 22. Make sure to send this to a couple people and like and follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and we'll see you next week.